The United States of America holds a distinction that no nation aspires to claim.
With less than 5% of the world's population, it incarcerates nearly 25% of the world's prisoners. This staggering reality did not emerge overnight. It was not inevitable.
When the Constitution was ratified, it contained within its text a loophole that would echo through centuries.
Slavery and involuntary servitude were prohibited, except as punishment for crime.
In the years following the Civil War, Southern states faced an economic crisis.
Through a series of laws known as the Black Codes, former Confederate states criminalized behaviors targeting newly freed African Americans. Vagrancy laws made it illegal to be unemployed. Other statutes criminalized minor offenses like loitering or speaking loudly.
The result was predictable and intentional. Thousands of black men were arrested, convicted, and sentenced to hard labor.
The convict leasing system that emerged became, in the words of historians, slavery by another name. The conditions convict laborers endured were often worse than slavery itself.
A company leasing convicts had no motivation to keep prisoners alive. If one died, another could be obtained cheaply. Death rates in convict leasing operations were staggering, sometimes reaching 30% annually.
This brutal system persisted until 1928. But even as convict leasing faded, the
convict leasing system allowed states to lease prisoners to private businesses, creating conditions often worse than slavery.
Urban rebellions erupted as Black Americans protested police brutality, economic inequality, and systemic racism.
While white Americans enjoyed post-war prosperity, Black community faced systematic housing.
Despite legal victories in civil rights, economic inequality and residential segregation persisted across America.
Politicians began using coded language about crime and disorder to appeal to racial anxieties without explicit racism.
By associating hippies with marijuana and black people with heroin, then criminalizing both heavily, they could disrupt those communities.
The war on drugs began, targeting communities of color with harsh new enforcement priorities and mandatory sentences.
Drug enforcement became concentrated in black and brown neighborhoods, despite similar drug use rates across all communities.
The law created a 100-to-1 sentencing disparity. 5 grams of crack triggered the same sentence as 500 grams of powder cocaine.
Black defendants received dramatically longer sentences than white defendants for essentially the same drug. The impact was immediate and devastating. The federal prison population began an exponential climb.
Between 1980 and 2000, the American prison population quintupled. Over 2 million Americans were behind bars.
Companies like Corrections Corporation of America built and operated facilities across the country with direct financial incentives to keep populations high.
By 2008, 1 in 100 American adults was behind bars. Among black men aged 20 to 34, the rate was 1 in 9.
These numbers represent millions of individual tragedies. Families torn apart, children growing up without parents.
former prisoners faced legal discrimination in employment, housing, education, and public benefits.
Communities were hollowed out by the systematic removal of their residents. The collateral consequences extended far beyond prison terms.
Former prisoners faced legal discrimination in employment, housing, education, and public benefits.
In many states, they lost the right to vote, a disenfranchisement that affected millions and disproportionately silenced Black political participation.
Though Black Americans constitute 13% of the population, they make up nearly 40% of prisoners.
Studies show white and Black Americans use drugs at similar rates, yet Black Americans are arrested and incarcerated at dramatically higher rates.
The discretion at every stage of criminal justice, from which neighborhoods to police heavily to sentencing, has compounded into systematic racial control.
The first decade of the 21st century witnessed the beginning of a reconsideration. In 2007, Texas invested in drug treatment and community supervision rather than building new prisons. The results were striking. Crime rates continued to fall, even as incarceration declined. Evidence accumulated that lengthy sentences did little to reduce crime and might actually increase recidivism.
Other states followed, implementing reforms to reduce mandatory minimums and expand parole eligibility.
The prison population began a slow decline from its 2008 peak, but remained by far the highest in the world.
Yet the fundamental structures of mass incarceration remained largely intact.
The coronavirus pandemic exposed the catastrophic public health consequences of congregate incarceration. Prisons and jails became hotspots for viral transmission as the disease spread rapidly through confined populations.
The pandemic demonstrated the possibility of dramatic decarceration as jurisdictions released thousands to reduce population density.
They demanded not merely accountability for individual acts of police violence, but a fundamental reimagining of public safety.
The movement for criminal justice reform gained unprecedented visibility following a tragic death that sparked national outrage.
Millions of Americans took to the streets in the largest protests in the nation's history.
Calls to defund or abolish police departments entered mainstream political discourse for the first time.
Social workers and counselors began handling situations previously addressed only by law enforcement.
The history of mass incarceration is ultimately a story about choices.
The history of mass incarceration is ultimately a story about choices.
At each turning point, policymakers chose punishment over treatment, exclusion over inclusion, control over freedom. The nation invested trillions in confinement, while neglecting education, healthcare, and economic opportunity.
The consequences have been catastrophic, not only for millions who pass through the system, but for the nation as a whole.
The United States cannot be understood apart from its prisons, which shape the life chances of entire communities.
The path forward remains contested, with some advocating modest reforms and others calling for abolition altogether.
But whatever direction the nation takes, it must reckon honestly with the choices that created the world's largest carceral state.
So when we look at the data, the trend is clear. This approach not only works, but it sets a new standard for innovation in the sector.
The history of mass incarceration is not merely a chronicle of the past. It is a challenge to the present.
The land of the free became the home of the incarcerated through human decisions. And only human decisions can chart a different course. What began with the loophole of the 13th Amendment can still be rewritten by the choices of today.
Across the nation, lawmakers are beginning to question whether incarceration truly serves justice or merely perpetuates injustice.
New models of accountability focus on restoration rather than retribution, on healing rather than harm. Some facilities that once held thousands now stand empty, monuments to a policy era that may finally be ending.
The land that once confined now nurtures. The resources that once punished now support.
In state after state, voting rights are being restored to those who served their sentences and seek to rejoin civic life.
The voice that was silenced speaks again. The citizen who was erased returns to participation.
From slavery to convict leasing to mass incarceration,
The thread of racial control runs through American history.
The question now facing America is what kind of nation it chooses to become.
Breaking this thread requires not just policy change, but a fundamental transformation in how America understands justice.
A new generation carries forward the struggle, armed with history and hope.
The monuments of democracy stand alongside the structures of mass incarceration, forcing America to reconcile its ideals with its reality.
The promise of freedom declared in 1865 remains unfulfilled for millions caught in the carceral system.
This isn't where your life ends. We are fighting for you every single day.
Treatment works where punishment failed. Support succeeds where isolation deepened despair.
Economic opportunity provides what prison never could, a genuine path to productive citizenship. Across America, communities are building alternatives to the failed policies of the past. Reform has found unlikely allies, as fiscal conservatives and progressive activists discover shared interests in
Billions once spent on incarceration are being redirected to prevention, education, and treatment.
New models of crisis response save lives that traditional policing might have ended.
Even within remaining prisons, transformation programs offer education, therapy, and genuine rehabilitation.
Those who survived the system now work to spare others the same fate.
Yes.
State by state, the evidence accumulates. Smart justice works better than harsh punishment. Science confirms what justice demands. Rehabilitation reduces crime more effectively than retribution. Families separated by decades of harsh policies are being reunited, their bonds tested but unbroken. Opportunity, when finally offered, proves that potential was never lacking, only the chance to demonstrate it. America's highest ideals and darkest practices have long coexisted. The choice of which to honor lies with each generation. Liberty and justice for all remains more aspiration than reality, but aspiration can become achievement through determined action.
The movement for justice continues, its ranks swelling with those who believe America can become what it claims to be.
From this distance, borders and bars seem absurd. The human family, artificially divided, yearns for wholeness.
For the youngest caught in the system, new approaches offer genuine second chances before lives are defined by single mistakes.
This history of mass incarceration is now your history to carry forward.
The past cannot be changed, but the future remains unwritten.
A nation that chose mass incarceration can choose a different path. The land of the free awaits its own liberation from the systems it created.
The souls who suffered are not forgotten. Their struggle echoes in every step toward justice.
Dawn breaks on a nation still becoming. What it becomes depends on choices made today.
The history of mass incarceration asks a simple question: what kind of nation do we choose to be? The answer is being written now.